Okay, get this. Today's deep dive, well, it takes us to 847 Fillmore Street in San Francisco. Yeah. But hold on, we're not just talking like Victorian architecture here. We're going deeper, like World War II deep,
Yeah.
right here in the city.
Yeah, no, it's a really fascinating period, especially when you think about where 847 Fillmore is. I mean, between December 41 and, the end of the war, this one address, it reflects some pretty big shifts across San Francisco.
I knew there had to be something more to it than just a pretty facade. It's kind of wild to think about a war happening, across the world, having this direct impact right here.
Oh, it did, absolutely. Just think about the Japanese-American internment. I mean, the impact on, like, the city's demographics, its social fabric, huge. And 847 Fillmore, right in the middle of it all.
Okay, so let's set the scene a bit just to, like, get our bearings. 847 Fillmore, it's in Alamo Square, right?
Exactly, right on the edge of what used to be a really bustling Japantown. And just a stone's throw from, well, the Fillmore district, which was becoming this, like, center of Black culture at the time.
Wow, so you've got this real melting pot of cultures all in one spot. Must have been a pretty dynamic area.
Incredibly so. And the sources we have, I mean, they really bring it to life. We've got newspaper clippings from the Chronicle, the Examiner, historical records, architectural plans, all that. It all just paints this really vivid picture.
And I think you mentioned we even have something from Benny Dobbs, right?
I do.
The young Communist League guy.
Yeah.
I remember you mentioning he had some connection to 847 Fillmore.
A transcript from it was an oral history interview done back in '87, where he talks about, holding meetings at 847 in the 1930s, adds another layer to the whole thing.
Wow, this house has seen it all. Okay, but before we go down that road, I want to circle back to those neighborhoods you mentioned. What happened to Japantown specifically when, Japanese Americans were forced into those internment camps?
It was a tragic and unjust period. I mean, just imagine an entire community uprooted, having to leave their homes, their businesses, everything. And that displacement, it had like a ripple effect, especially on the nearby, Fillmore district.
It's heartbreaking to think about. So what happened to all those empty houses and businesses in Japantown?
Okay, so now picture this. Wartime, right. San Francisco is flooded with people coming for work in the shipyards, all the war industries. And housing, it's suddenly incredibly scarce.
Oh, so you've got this huge demand for housing and then this whole neighborhood that's basically empty. I can see where this is going.
Exactly. It created like this perfect storm for a housing crisis. And we actually have a document that gives us a real glimpse into how this played out at 847 Fillmore. An inspection report from November 1943.
November 43, so that's what, a little over a year after the bombing of Pearl Harbor and the start of the whole internment. What does this report tell us?
It describes what was once a 2-story dwelling that was illegally converted into 4 stories. So you had families crammed into the attic, the basement, living in honestly appalling conditions.
That sounds awful. What kind of details does the report give about the actual living conditions?
Well, the inspector, he cites lack of proper sanitation, severe overcrowding. He even says there was appalling danger to health and safety. It's pretty intense. He actually even compares the conditions at 847 Fillmore to, get this, the worst he'd seen in Japantown.
Wow. That's a pretty stark comparison. It really highlights how dire the situation was. So who are these families living in, these horrible conditions?
According to the report, the families in the attic, they were Black migrants who had recently arrived, from Texas, Louisiana. They were drawn to San Francisco, like so many others, by, the promise of war work.
So you got this convergence of events, Japanese Americans forced out, Black families migrating in, and this massive housing shortage. It's like 847 Fillmore became this microcosm of these huge societal shifts.
It did. You have one group displaced, creating this void that's filled by another group facing, their own set of challenges and discrimination. And in the middle of it all, 847 Fillmore, bearing witness to this really turbulent chapter in history.
And this is where it gets really interesting. The report mentions that the owner of 847 Fillmore at this time was a Black man named Hilton Cobb.
Right, and that just adds another layer to this whole, already intricate situation. You've got a Black landlord operating within a system that was inherently unequal, and he becomes part of a housing crisis that, stemmed from the displacement of another minority group.
Yeah, it definitely raises some tough questions. What were the, circumstances that led to this situation? Did Cobb see this, an opportunity in this housing shortage? Or was he also a victim of, circumstance, caught in a system designed to exploit vulnerabilities?
It's hard to say for sure. The sources we have, they don't really give us much insight into Cobb's, his motivations, or the specific circumstances that led him to become the landlord of 847 Fillmore, especially during, this turbulent period.
Yeah, it's a reminder that history often leaves us with more questions than answers.
Yeah.
I guess it's our job to kind of piece together the fragments and, try to understand those complexities of the past.
And even with those gaps, I think the story of 847 Fillmore during this period, it reveals so much about the impact of wartime policies, housing shortages, and, well, just the racial dynamics at play in San Francisco at the time.
It's a powerful reminder that individual lives are often shaped by, these forces larger than themselves, and sometimes a single address can tell us volumes about those forces.
Yeah, it is incredible, huh? How a single house can become this intersection of, individual lives and these broader historical forces.
Right. And we were just talking about Hilton Cobb, that black landlord of 847 Fillmore during the war. I'm curious, do we know anything more about him? Like, who was he?
Honestly, not really. The sources we have, they're pretty thin on details about Cobb himself, unfortunately, but they do give us these little glimpses into the lives of some of his tenants at 847 during this time period.
Okay, tell me more about that. What kind of glimpses?
For example, there's this mention of a woman named Sarah Jones, lived in the attic with her three young children. She'd come from Texas just a few months before that 1943 inspection, hoping to find work in, the shipyards.
Oh, man, it must have been so hard for her. Arriving in a new city, facing, probably a lot of discrimination, and then, being forced into these cramped and unsafe living conditions.
Absolutely. And her story, it really speaks to the experiences of so many Black women who migrated to San Francisco during the war, They came looking for opportunities, but they often ended up, well, relegated to the margins, facing racism and sexism, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder that the whole promise of the Golden Gate, it wasn't a reality for everyone. Were there any other stories from this time that stood out to you?
Well, there is just a brief mention of a family, the Washingtons. They had lived in the basement of 847. And they had actually been they'd been running a small restaurant in Japantown before they were forced to relocate.
Oh man, that must have been devastating to lose not just their home but their livelihood too.
It was, and a pretty common experience for Japanese American families during the internment. They were, stripped of everything they had worked for. Businesses shuttered, dreams, shattered.
It's hard to fathom, the resilience they must have had to rebuild after something so traumatic.
It's remarkable. It really speaks to the strength and determination of that whole community.
We've been talking a lot about the impact of the Japanese American internment on the housing situation at 847. But I want to circle back to the house's earlier connection to the Young Communist League. I'm still thinking about that secret recording from 1936.
Oh yeah. It's a fascinating piece of the puzzle for sure.
Yeah.
Remember Benny Dobbs, that charismatic leader we talked about?
Oh yeah. Every young communist should spend every free night at 847 Fillmore Street.
Guy.
He clearly saw the house as key to their whole movement.
He did. He really did. And the recording, it gives us this incredible window into his thinking, Yeah. He was convinced that a revolution was brewing, that a clash between the working class and the elites, it was inevitable.
And I think you even mentioned he said something about welcoming a civil war. That's pretty radical, even for a communist.
It is. But it kind of reflects the anxieties and tensions of that whole era, the Depression. It had created all this widespread economic hardship. And so, these radical ideologies, they were gaining a lot of traction.
So Dobbs was kind of tapping into that sense of unrest and channeling it into this call for revolution.
Yeah.
Did he actually have any concrete plans, or was it mostly just, this fiery rhetoric?
Oh, no. He was actually pretty strategic. The recording, it actually reveals that he had these plans to infiltrate other organizations like the American Youth Congress and then work from within to, advance their agenda.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So it wasn't just about taking to the streets and protesting. They were trying to influence the system from the inside.
Exactly. And it shows a much more sophisticated approach than we might typically, think of when we think of a revolutionary movement.
Right. And it makes you wonder about the long-term impact of those efforts. Did they actually manage to influence any any significant changes in policy?
Right. Yeah, that's a question for the historians to debate. But there's no doubt that the YCL and figures like Benny Dobbs, they played a real role in shaping the political landscape of San Francisco during this period.
It's amazing to think about these ideas being debated and discussed right there at 847 Fillmore.
Yeah.
Years before the war even started. It just really highlights how this house became this gathering place for people with a shared vision, whether it was for, social change or just for a roof over their heads.
Right. And that's what makes 847 Fillmore so unique, right? It's not just a building. It's this space where history unfolded, where leaves intersected and where ideas were debated.
It makes you think about the hidden stories in our own communities, like what conversations were happening in the houses on our streets 100 years ago, what dreams were being pursued, what challenges were people facing.
Yeah. It's a great question to ponder. And it reminds us that history isn't just about, big events and famous people. It's also about these everyday lives of ordinary people.
Mm-hmm.
The stories that often go untold.
We talked earlier about those fires that 847 Fillmore went through. It's incredible that it even survived, given how much damage there was.
Yeah, those fires were definitely a turning point, especially the one in '64 that destroyed the fourth floor.
Oh yeah, that's the one that led to the flat roof we see today.
Oh, right. And that flat roof, it became something really, really special.
Wait, don't tell me. It's the rooftop deck, the one with the amazing views.
You got it. It's like a phoenix rising from the ashes, a symbol of resilience and transformation.
Oh, I can't wait to hear more about it.
Mm-hmm.
So that rooftop deck, the one that came out of that 1964 fire, it's hard to imagine something so beautiful coming from something so destructive.
Right. It really is a testament to, I guess, like the power of reinvention. Just imagine stepping out onto this huge wooden deck surrounded by like greenery with these panoramic views of the whole city.
Oh, wow. So we're talking like City Hall, the Golden Gate Bridge, maybe even Alcatraz.
All of that and more. You get like sweeping views of the cityscape. I mean, everything from the Transamerica Pyramid to the rolling hills of the East Bay. It's like an urban oasis, this place of tranquility right in the middle of all the city's hustle and bustle.
That sounds incredible. It's almost, I don't know, poetic. Like this house that has seen so much upheaval, so much transformation, and now it offers this incredible perspective on the city.
Right. And speaking of transformation, we should talk about how the house itself looks today. You mentioned it earlier that it's been described as having this minimalist facade, which seems a little, counterintuitive for a Victorian, I guess.
Yeah. It's hard to picture. How do you make a Victorian minimalist?
Okay, so think about all the like typical ornate details of a Queen Anne Victorian, all that gingerbread trim, the intricate carvings, the decorative flourishes, all of it. Now imagine stripping most of that away, leaving like these clean lines, smooth stucco walls, a more streamlined silhouette.
Oh, okay. So it's like a Victorian that's gone through this like modern makeover.
Exactly. And it really works. The minimalist aesthetic, it highlights the house's like strong architectural bones while giving it this contemporary feel.
Yeah. It sounds like the perfect blend of old and new, honoring the past while still embracing the present.
It is. And it actually reflects a broader trend that we're seeing in historic preservation, finding ways to adapt and repurpose older buildings to meet, modern needs without erasing their history.
This deep dive has been amazing. We started with what seemed like, just this simple address, but 847 Fillmore Street, it's become this whole intricate tapestry of history and architecture and social change. It's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and what's really remarkable is that this is just one story out of countless others in San Francisco. I mean, every street, every building, they all hold these hidden histories just waiting to be uncovered.
You've given me a whole new way of looking at my city. I think I'm going to spend the rest of the day just like wandering around my neighborhood, imagining the lives that have been lived and the stories that have unfolded in the houses I pass every day.
That's the beauty of history, right? It's all around us, woven into the fabric of our lives. We just have to be willing to look for it.
Well, thank you for being our guide on this deep dive. It's been a truly unforgettable journey.
The pleasure was all mine.